Emmett Calloway didn't have time for rich jerks who thought the world owed them something, especially not when his 5-year-old son was sitting across from him, happily munching on a chocolate chip muffin, and a woman was clearly being harassed at the next table. "Hey," Emmett said sharply, standing up so fast his chair scraped back against the floor. She said no, "You deaf or just that pathetic?" The guy mid-30s, slicked back hair, Rolex flashing, turned with a sneer. "Mind your business, man. You don't even know who you're talking to." "I don't care who you are," Emmett snapped. She said no. "Back off." The man looked like he might argue until he caught the steel in Emmett's eyes. With a scoff, he turned and walked out, leaving behind a stunned silence and a woman blinking in shock. "Wow," the woman breathed, clearly trying to compose herself. "Thank you. I didn't think he'd actually leave." Emmett nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. "You okay?" She smiled, a little breathless. Yeah, that was really brave." From the table, a small voice piped up. "My dad's not scared of anybody." Emmett glanced at his son and chuckled. "That's Will. He's 5.5 and apparently my hype man." She laughed, really laughed, and Emmett noticed her eyes were the kind of green that pulled you in and didn't let go. Her long caramel brown hair spilled over her shoulders, and she had this effortless elegance about her, like she belonged on the cover of a magazine but didn't care. "I'm Celine," she said, extending her hand, "and you're definitely my hero today, Emmett. And I'm just a guy who hates bullies." He shook her hand. Her grip was warm, steady. "You want to sit? Will's only spilled his juice once today. That's a record." Celine hesitated for the briefest second, then smiled again, softer this time. "Sure, I'd like that." They sat. Will offered her part of his muffin. Emmett tried not to stare too long, but something about her, how she looked at Will and actually listened to him, how she didn't seem fazed by the worn edges of Emmett's jacket or the tired circles under his eyes, made him feel like he'd stepped into a different world just by meeting her. "So," Emmett said, sipping his coffee, "you come here a lot, or just unlucky today?" "First time," she said. "I just moved back to the city, thought I'd try something new." "Back?" he asked, curious. She nodded. "I grew up around here, left when I was 18, needed a break from everything." Emmett understood that feeling way too well. "I get that. I left too once, came back with a baby and no plan." Her eyes flicked to Will, who was now drawing on the napkin with a crayon from his pocket. "You're doing okay," she said warmly. "You stood up for someone today." "That's more than most people would do," Emmett shrugged. "You do the same." "I don't know," Celine said quietly, almost like she was admitting something. "I've spent most of my life around people who look the other way." Will tugged at Emmett's sleeve. "Can we go to the park now?" "In a bit, bud." Celine smiled at Will, then looked back at Emmett. "You're a good dad." He didn't know why that made his throat tighten, maybe because he wasn't used to hearing it, maybe because she said it like it was obvious. "Trying my best," he said. They talked for another 10 minutes, nothing deep, just easy conversation. Then Celine stood, her phone buzzing in her purse. "I should go, but I'd like to see you again." Emmett blinked. "Really?" She tilted her head. "Why not? I'm not exactly shining armor material." "Exactly," she said, eyes twinkling. "That's what makes you real." She took a pen from her bag, scribbled something on a napkin, and handed it to him. "Call me." He stared at the number, stunned. "Yeah, I will." When she left, Emmett sat down heavily. Will looked up. "Dad?" "Yeah. Are you gonna marry her?" Emmett laughed. "Let's start with coffee first, buddy." What Emmett didn't know and wouldn't for a while was that Celine Thorne wasn't just new in town. She was a millionaire heiress who'd just taken over her late grandfather's real estate empire. She owned half the buildings on that street, including the café they were sitting in. But none of that had mattered when Emmett had stood up for her without hesitation. That moment had meant more to her than any man ever buying her a diamond ring. And for the first time in years, Celine felt like she'd met someone who didn't want anything from her, except maybe her time, and she was more than ready to give it. The next time Emmett saw Celine, it wasn't at a café or on a sidewalk. It was at the front entrance of Hartley Elementary, where Will had just sprinted out the doors with his backpack bouncing behind him and a paper crown on his head that said Star of the Week. "Daddy, look," Will shouted, waving a crumpled certificate in the air. "Mrs. Kim said I was extra kind and I get to pick a prize tomorrow." Emmett ruffled his hair. Well, I hope the prize is better than last time. That whistle nearly sent me into cardiac arrest. I want the glitter putty, Will said solemnly. Emmett opened his mouth to tell him he'd need to keep the glitter far, far away from the couch when a voice interrupted from behind. I didn't expect to see you here. He turned, and there she was, Celine. But this time, she wasn't in jeans and a sweater. She wore a tailored cream coat over a navy blouse, her heels sharp against the pavement. Her presence felt like a ripple through the parking lot, as though the air knew she didn't quite belong in the chaos of spilled lunchboxes and honking horns. Celine, he said, blinking. What are you doing here? My goddaughter goes here, she said, nodding toward a girl with a pink unicorn backpack. Her mom had an emergency meeting, so I offered to pick her up, and then I saw a little boy in a crown running at you like you were the king of the world. Will looked up. Hi again, he said, not at all shy as he adjusted his crown. You're the muffin lady, Celine laughed, a real, delighted sound that turned a few heads. That might be the best title I've ever had. Emmett's brain was still catching up. So you're local. Like, really local. Just moved into the penthouse at Monroe Tower, she said casually, as though she hadn't just dropped the name of the most expensive residential building within 30 miles. Emmett raised an eyebrow. You're not exactly blending in. I'm not trying to, she replied, tilting her head. But I didn't expect to run into you here either. Small world. Will tugged his sleeve. Can we go to the playground? Before Emmett could answer, Celine crouched slightly so she was eye level with Will. Mind if I tag along? I'm pretty good at pushing swings. Will shrugged. Okay, but I get the tall one. The three of them walked the short distance to the neighborhood park just behind the school. It was nothing fancy, faded jungle gym, 2 squeaky swings, wood chips that always found their way into shoes, but to Will, it was a kingdom. Emmett watched as Celine pushed Will higher and higher, her laughter echoing each time he shouted for more. She didn't hold back. She didn't flinch when he jumped off mid-swing or complain when he got dirt on her coat. She was all in. He sat on the bench, arms folded, watching them with a quiet kind of awe. You look like you're calculating something, Celine said, finally settling beside him as Will ran off to climb the monkey bars. I am, Emmett said. Trying to figure out how someone like you ends up in a park with rusted swing chains and gum stuck to the slide. I grew up going to parks like this, she said, before my family's money turned into something bigger than we knew how to handle. My grandfather believed in building up the city, but he also believed in keeping his feet on the ground. I'm trying to do the same, he glanced at her. So you're not just rich, you're legacy rich. I'm managing the foundation now, she said, brushing a leaf off her sleeve. We fund housing projects, job training centers, small business grants. I've been touring the neighborhoods we invested in. Emmett blinked. Wait, the Callahan Center, that's you, she nodded. It was my first solo project. It's in a rough area, but we turned an abandoned factory into a resource hub. My family wasn't thrilled about the location. I've been there, he said before he could stop himself. They helped me out when things got tight. It's a good place. She turned to him fully, her expression softening. That means a lot. Guess I owe you more than just a muffin, he said. She laughed again. Let's call it even. Will raced over then, breathless and red-cheeked. I'm hungry, Emmett stood, brushing off his jeans. We'll grab dinner. Celine hesitated. Then, do you both want to come up to my place? I've got leftover pasta and a view that makes up for my terrible cooking. Emmett hesitated. You sure? I don't invite just anyone, she said, locking eyes with him. Only the ones who don't expect anything from me but time. That hit deeper than he wanted to admit. He nodded slowly. All right, but if Will breaks something, it's on you. Will beamed. I want to see the view. Monroe Tower loomed over the city like a monument to ambition. The elevator ride alone felt like ascending into another world. The moment the doors opened to her penthouse, Will let out a low whistle. Whoa, the entire living room was glass, the skyline stretching out in a canvas of gold and steel. A grand piano sat near the window, untouched. The furniture looked like it belonged in a design magazine, but nothing about the space felt cold. It felt lived in. There were books stacked on the coffee table, a half-finished puzzle on the dining room console, and a pair of ballet flats kicked off near the entryway. "Make yourselves at home," she said, slipping off her coat. Will wandered off toward the window without hesitation. Emmett stayed still, trying to process everything. "You okay?" she asked, watching him closely. He nodded. "Yeah, just didn't expect the view to be this good." She smiled. "It's not the view that's making you nervous, it's the difference." He didn't answer. "Let me be clear," she added, her tone gentler now. "I invited you here because I like who you are, not because I want to impress you, not because I think you need saving. Just because I feel something with you I haven't felt in a long time." Will called out from the window. "The cars look like ants." Emmett looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time since they met, he realized what was happening wasn't some coincidence. It was a collision, two worlds slamming into each other with no warning, and he wasn't sure yet if he was ready, but he wanted to be. Emmett wasn't sure what surprised him more, that Celine could cook, or that she didn't seem to care when Will accidentally knocked over the salt cellar that looked like it cost more than Emmett's rent. She just laughed, handed Will a towel and said, "You're lucky at least it wasn't the vase behind you." "Was it expensive?" Will asked, rubbing at the granite countertop. "Just sentimental," she said, flicking a bit of flour off his cheek. "You're off the hook." Emmett leaned against the island, arms crossed. "You do this a lot. Invite strangers into your home and cook pasta from scratch." "I don't consider you a stranger anymore," she said, glancing at him. "And I needed a break from catered meals. It's easier to burn garlic when you're the one holding the pan." Will, now seated at the massive dining table with a full plate in front of him, swung his legs and asked, "Do you have a butler?" Celine paused. "I have a house manager named Lydia. She mostly rolls her eyes at me and refuses to let me eat cereal for dinner." "She sounds cool," Will said through a mouthful of noodles. "She is." Later, after Will had fallen asleep on the oversized sectional in the meteor room with a blanket tucked up to his chin and a cartoon murmuring in the background, Emmett joined Celine on the terrace. The city stretched around them, glittering and alive. There was a low hum of traffic below, but up here it felt like another planet. Celine leaned against the railing, her face turned toward the wind. "This view used to make me feel invincible. Now it just makes me feel small." Emmett stepped beside her. "Small isn't always bad." "No," she said. "But it's a strange thing when you're raised to believe the world is yours to control." He studied her profile, the sharp lines softened by the glow from the terrace lights. "Do you regret it, all this?" "No, but I regret the people I lost to chase it," she said. "My parents divorced before I turned 10. I barely saw my father after that. My mother tried to remarry into even more money. I learned early that affection came second to ambition." Emmett exhaled slowly. "That's a brutal lesson." "It makes you cautious," she admitted. "I used to think love meant sacrifice. Now I think it might mean showing up, even when it's inconvenient." He glanced back toward the living room where Will was still fast asleep, curled up like he belonged there. "I've had to show up every day, no backup plan, no trust fund. Just diapers and daycare and a lot of guessing." Celine looked at him, her voice softer. "You've done more than guess. You've raised a boy who trusts the world enough to hand someone half his muffin." "That's not nothing." They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with something unspoken. "I don't want to scare you off," she said suddenly, "but I also don't want to pretend I'm someone I'm not." "I've already seen who you are," Emmett said. "The version that gets on the ground to push a kid on a swing and doesn't flinch when her kitchen gets wrecked." She turned to him, eyes searching. "You're not intimidated," he met her gaze. "You're not a bank account, you're a person, a complicated one, yeah. But aren't we all?" Her lips parted, but instead of answering, she reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I've never had someone say that and actually mean it," she said after a beat. "Well," Emmett said with a small, crooked smile, "I don't say things I don't mean." She pulled him down gently, pressing a soft kiss to his cheek. "You don't have to stay tonight, but I'd like you to." Emmett looked back toward the living room again. "Will's due at school pretty early. I'd have to leave before sunrise. Then I'll make you coffee before you go." He hesitated, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "You sure?" "I haven't been this sure in years." They didn't say anything else for a long time. The city moved around them, silent and sprawling, while two people from wildly different worlds stood close enough to hear each other breathe. and for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt alone. Later, while Emmett carried a sleeping Will to the guest room and settled him in gently, Celine stood in the doorway watching. Her eyes were unreadable, but her chest rose with a breath that sounded like relief. When Emmett straightened, she stepped forward and whispered, "He's lucky to have you." Emmett looked down at Will, then at her. "I think we're all a little lucky right now." She nodded once, then reached for his other hand, drawing him out of the room as quietly as they'd entered. And in the hush of that penthouse, with the weight of the world finally unburdened from both their shoulders, Emmett realized something he hadn't dared admit until now. He wasn't falling for her. He already had. The ballroom shimmered with golden light, its vaulted ceilings and crystal chandeliers creating a dreamlike glow that spilled across polished marble floors. A string quartet played near the grand staircase, the music soft but full, weaving through the air like silk. Emmett adjusted the stiff collar of his suit jacket, feeling entirely out of place as servers in black jackets glided past with silver trays of champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres he couldn't pronounce. He hadn't wanted to come. He'd told Celine that 3 times. But she'd only tilted her head and said, "You saved me once. Let me return the favor." Now here he was, standing on the edge of a gala fundraiser hosted by the Thorne Foundation, surrounded by the kind of people who didn't blink at 5-figure donations or designer cufflinks. Will was at home with Lydia, who Celine had insisted was more than capable, and had even coaxed him into baking cookies for Dad's fancy night. Emmett had never worn a tuxedo before. Celine had sent it to his apartment, perfectly tailored, with a handwritten note tucked in the pocket that read, "You belong everywhere I am." He spotted her at the top of the stairs, and for a moment, everything else blurred. Celine wore a midnight blue gown that clung to her like it had been stitched to her body by the stars themselves. Her hair was swept up, revealing her neck and shoulders, and a sapphire pendant rested just above her collarbone. She wasn't trying to impress tonight, she was owning the room. But when their eyes met, her whole face softened. The room didn't matter anymore. "You came," she said when he reached her, a quiet smile tugging at her lips. "I still don't know what foie gras is," he replied. "You're not missing much." They left the crowd behind and wandered out to the rooftop garden, where hedges were sculpted into archways, and soft lights lit the paths like fallen stars. The city glittered below them in 1,000 tiny specks. "I've been thinking," Celine said, walking slowly beside him, "about what this all means. You and me, the life we come from." He watched her carefully. "You're not second-guessing, are you?" "No," she said gently. "I'm trying to understand how to make it work. I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who only look up. You're the first person who ever made me want to look straight ahead." He stopped walking. "I can't give you this ballrooms, galas, handshakes that hide deals. That's not my world, Celine." She turned to face him, her voice steady. "I'm not asking you to give me any of that. I already have it. What I don't have is someone who tells the truth to my face and means it. Someone who doesn't care about the last name stitched into the lining of my world." He reached for her hand, grounding them both. "You're not afraid of how different this is." "I'm terrified," she admitted. "But I'd rather be afraid standing beside you than safe with someone who doesn't see me." He kissed her then, slow and certain, as the city pulsed below them. It wasn't a kiss of beginnings, it was a promise of something already rooted, something real. Inside, the gala continued. But when they returned to the ballroom, hand in hand, Emmett noticed the shift. People looked, whispers passed, but Celine didn't care. She didn't let go of his hand, not even when her board members approached or the mayor stopped to greet her. She introduced Emmett without hesitation. "This is Emmett Calloway, my partner." And Emmett, for the first time, didn't flinch at the attention. He stood taller, because she'd chosen him not as a project, not as a rebellion, but as a man she respected. Later that night, back at her penthouse, Emmett walked into the guest room to check on Will. He found the boy asleep, curled under a blanket with a half-painted cookie on the nightstand and a note in Lydia's handwriting. "He says he's saving the rest for you." Celine appeared in the doorway behind him. He asked if he could stay over again next weekend. "I said yes, if it's all right with you." Emmett nodded, emotion catching him off guard. "It is." She stepped forward, resting her head on his shoulder. "Emmett?" "Yeah." I don't want just weekends. I want days that start with burnt toast and end with cartoons and board games. I want mornings where he runs into our room because he's had a bad dream. I want all of it. He turned to her slowly. You're saying, I want a home with you, both of you, not just visits or sleepovers. I want to build a life, he exhaled, every wall he'd built around his heart falling quietly away. You sure? She nodded. I've never been more sure. The next weeks moved quickly, not in chaos but clarity. Emmett moved in, not because it was easier but because it was right. Will adjusted faster than either of them expected, his new room already filled with his drawings and pillows shaped like stars. Celine traded meetings for school pickups when she could, and Emmett found himself helping her review grant proposals at night while she stole his fries off the plate. They had disagreements, of course, about paint colors and bedtime routines and whether pineapple belonged on pizza, but they never went to bed angry. They never walked away from the hard parts. And then, one spring evening, as the city bloomed in pink blossoms and warm breezes, Celine stood in the park where they'd first walked together. She held a small velvet box in her hand, her fingers trembling. You stood up for me when you didn't know my name, she said, looking into his eyes. You protected me without expecting anything in return. You gave my heart a place to land when I didn't even know it was falling. He stared at her, stunned. I know most people wait for the guy to do this, she said. But I've never followed rules that didn't make sense. When she opened the box, the ring inside wasn't flashy. No diamonds, no glitter. Just a simple gold band with a tiny engraving inside, always forward. Marry me, Emmett Calloway, she whispered. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. He didn't hesitate. He pulled her into his arms, kissed her hard, and whispered against her lips, yes, 100 times yes. The wedding was small, just close friends, a quiet garden, and while carrying the rings with the seriousness of a night. There were no reporters, no gala-style drama, just vows spoken with trembling voices and eyes full of tears. And when Emmett kissed his wife for the first time, with the sun setting behind them and Will cheering like it was the world's greatest magic trick, he knew he'd never feel poor again. Not when he had everything he'd never dared to dream of. Rain tapped softly against the windows of the lake house, a steady rhythm that blurred the outside world into watercolor strokes. Celine stood barefoot on the stone hearth, shoulders wrapped in a wool blanket, watching Emmett stack a few logs into the fireplace. The scent of pine and ash clung to the air, mingling with the faint aroma of cinnamon from the tea she'd made earlier. You're going to give that fire too much oxygen, she said, watching him adjust the logs again. Emmett looked over his shoulder. You're supposed to let me feel rugged and competent. This ruins the illusion. She crossed the room, the blanket trailing behind her like a train, and knelt beside him. You're already rugged. I'm just making sure we don't wake up to smoke detectors. He grinned, flicked the lighter, and the fire crackled to life. The sudden warmth spread through the room, casting flickers of gold across the exposed beams and the low ceiling. The lake house wasn't huge, but it was theirs, bought after months of searching for a place untouched by noise and deadlines. No staff, no obligations. Just them and long weekends carved out of the city's chaos. Celine leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. I haven't felt this quiet in years. You mean peaceful? No, she murmured. I mean quiet, like the kind of quiet that doesn't need fixing. Emmett wrapped an arm around her waist, fingers brushing the edge of her blanket. You know, I used to think silence meant something was wrong. That I had to fill the space. And now I think it means I finally got what I was chasing. A knock came at the door, followed by the unmistakable sound of small footsteps stumbling over the porch threshold. Will burst in, soaked from the knees down, his raincoat flapping open and his curls clinging to his forehead. I found frogs, he announced triumphantly, holding out a plastic jar with two very unimpressed amphibians inside. Celine blinked. Please tell me those aren't coming inside. We'll look to Emmett for backup. They don't like the cold. We'll build them a shelter outside, Emmett said, already standing, maybe near that old tree stump. Will barreled back toward the door, frogs in tow. Emmett turned to Celine. I'll be back in 5 minutes. Don't clean the mugs. I like pretending I'm the one who made the tea. Once he left, Celine wandered to the piano tucked into the corner of the room. It wasn't there when they bought the house. Emmett had surprised her with it 2 months earlier, after watching her trace her fingers absent-mindedly across the keys of one at a gallery opening. She sat down, her hands hovering over the keys. A few soft notes poured out a lullaby her mother used to hum when she thought no one was listening. Somewhere between the second and third chord, she heard the door creak open again. "I didn't know you could play," Emmett said, drying his hands with a towel. "I don't." "Not really," she replied, not turning around. "But I remember the songs." He came up behind her and placed his hands gently on her shoulders. "You should teach Will. He's got the attention span of a squirrel, but he listens to you." Celine tipped her head back, smiling up at him. "He listens to both of us. He just pretends not to when he wants a second dessert." They stayed like that for a while, the fire behind them casting long shadows across the floor. The rain had softened into mist outside, and the frogs were now comfortably settled in a mossy corner of the yard. Later, after Will was tucked into bed with a flashlight and a book about sea monsters, Celine and Emmett lay curled up on the couch, a thick quilt draped over them. She rested her cheek against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Do you miss it?" she asked suddenly. "The pace, the noise, the chase," he shook his head. "I used to think ambition meant never stopping, but maybe it just means knowing what's worth holding on to." "And what's that, you?" He kissed her forehead. "This, us." Under the quilt, she reached for his hand. "I've been offered a new role, international expansion. It would mean a lot of traveling, late nights, time away." He tensed slightly. "Do you want it?" "I thought I did," she said. "But then I imagined coming home to an airport instead of Will's drawings on the fridge. I imagined falling asleep alone in a hotel bed instead of listening to you mumble in your sleep about burnt toast." He laughed quietly. "I do not mumble." She turned to face him fully. "I'm not taking it. I don't need more to prove I'm capable. I just need more of this. Of us." "Then we're on the same page," he said. "Because I've been thinking about opening a small workshop, custom furniture, local orders. It's not glamorous, but it means I get to be back before dark." Her eyes lit up. "You've been holding that in." "I wanted to be sure I wasn't trading one struggle for another." "You're not," she said. "You're building something with your hands. That's never the wrong choice." They kissed, then not like the world was ending or even beginning, but like it had finally settled into place. Quietly, confidently, spring turned to summer. The lake house filled with the scent of grilled vegetables and the buzz of distant radios. Will caught his first fish and begged to release it, saying it looked too surprised. He learned to ride a bike without training wheels and fell into the lake fully clothed more than once. Celine taught him how to read music. Emmett taught him how to sand wood without splinters. Together they taught him how to show up, how to be kind, how to say sorry when it mattered most. On their anniversary, Emmett built a bench from reclaimed oak and carved their wedding date into the underside. He placed it beneath the willow tree that shaded the edge of the dock. Celine painted a small sign that read "Always Forward." They didn't need crowds or headlines. They didn't need the world to celebrate them. They had each other. They had Will. They had a life stitched together with shared sunrises, whispered apologies, inside jokes, and the kind of love that didn't need explaining. And in the quiet of the lake house, with the fireplace embers glowing and the rain beginning again, they found something better than perfection. They found peace. They found home.